generation of tools. It's really built to make cybersecurity easier. Hello, welcome back to another episode of the MSP Cyber Roundtable. I have with me back a returning guest, Dinesh Mehn from DigitoWork, and today we're going to be talking about pen testing again. This is part two of a two-part series. Last time we were talking about general infrastructure. Today is all about actual business applications, custom software, that kind of thing. Which is a totally different world, but of course, Dinesh is our expert in certified pen tests. Before we get into that, Dinesh, we were just talking before the call. I understand the heat's off at home, and you're enjoying some cooler weather, and you're getting ready for the weekend. Tell me more about this journey for the weekend. So you're going to be hunting down some food?
Yep, absolutely. I'll be driving down. It's raining over here, so I'll be driving down and then get some good food, spend some time with the family. So that's what I look forward for this weekend as such.
All right.
Mostly,
Well, we'll escape the security world for a couple days. So
but we need to be secured even when we are outside.
yeah, someone else's problem for a couple years or a couple days. Yeah. So we're talking about pen testing today, and I wanna just talk about the word pen testing for a moment. It's a bit of a lay terminology, the word pen test, because in the world of pen testing, of course, we have specific words we use for type of practices, right? Penetration testing is this whole category that can mean many different things and really doesn't mean anything specific. But I know that you live in the world of certified penetration testing, which is very precise, right, in what it delivers from an assurance perspective. When we're in the world of business applications and not general infrastructure, what types of testing are we looking at? What types of modes, and how is the whole category different from general infrastructure testing?
So let's first understand what pen testing is all about. Pen testing is all about finding out your vulnerabilities, finding out your weaknesses, so that you can understand where your system is weak, where somebody can attack, or where somebody can attack and sneak into your applications and then do the breach, steal the data, take control, whatever he wants to do, he can do that. Like, you can take a good analogy of it as a human body, where when you go for a diagnostic test, what are you trying to find? You're trying to find what problems or weaknesses I have in my body. The same is the analogy for the software applications also. Where is the weakness? We might think that we have developed the best application. We are delivering all the functionality, but that is not enough, because now there are a lot of threat actors who are there to exploit the weakness. So when we use the word exploit the weakness, the first word that comes up is weakness. If you have a weakness, somebody is going to exploit. And a lot of people think that penetration testing should only be done by the large organizations, or they are the only ones who are impacted. But that's not the case. So let's understand, pen testing is needed by large organizations, is needed by medium organizations, and is also needed by the smaller organizations. Because whether the organization is big or small, the data that resides in an application or the functionality that the application is delivering is critical. A good analogy is like a baby who is like 1 day old or an old man who is 90 years old. The organs that they have are still the same. And
I want to stop there because you've been using some expert terminology, and you might not realize it's expert terminology, but and I brought up this graphic because all of these I want to define these terms, but you also used another one, weakness, and we'll come back to that. I think that people that are on the edge of the security world, they're either just learning or maybe they've been on the edge of the security world for a long time and it's part of their skill set, but maybe they haven't focused specifically on just security. They sometimes use these words interchangeably: exploit, vulnerability, weakness. Um, these actually mean different things. Threat, right? These mean really different things. And I've seen people misuse this, even vendors all the time, confusing things like threat feeds with vulnerability feeds, confusing words like vulnerability with exploit or vulnerability with weakness. I wanna slow down for some definitions. So we'll do a little one-on-one real quick. So um, the vulnerabilities are the things that you really, as a defender, you want to look for, right? Because that's what allows the threat actor in. And in technical terms, a threat actor is not always a person. It's not even always something technical. It could be something as simple as like a flammable material could be a threat actor, right? Fire could be a threat actor. Getting through a flammable material. But basically, a threat actor exploits, right? It's a verb, really, and I think people get confused there because there's exploit code, right? And then there's active exploiting, right? And they're actually different things. When we say a exploit, we're talking about a piece of code. Usually, it's reusable,
yep,
right? But then we use the word exploit, but that's a verb, and it's the same word in a different context, right? But threat actors exploit, which is both a verb, the thing they're doing, but it's also a tool they use, right? Um, a vulnerability to then get at that asset, and then once they get at that asset, they can move around and cause their damage and all of that. And these are really specific, and it's important. And so when you're doing penetration testing, right? I mean, it's important to understand who the threat actors might be and what types of exploits might exist out in the wild, but that's not the focus necessarily of a penetration test, right? You're seeking out those vulnerabilities, and you might test them with exploits. You're simulating the threat actor, right? But you might also not test them. You might just inventory them. You might say, well, we know this would work through that hole. This key will fit into that slot, and you document it, and that would be that. Or you might actually test it for real in the real world, right? And so either of those things could happen as part of your pen test. So I just wanted to lay out the terminology there, and then you use this other word, weakness, which um, it's not a word that is well understood by most IT infrastructure people, and they use the word weakness all the time. But usually, when we use the word weakness, um, it's not exactly the same thing as a vulnerability. It's really like a suboptimal scenario. And Dinesh, if you have a more technical version, I haven't I haven't been put on the spot to define the word weakness from a security perspective before, but it differs from a vulnerability. I understand because uh, a weakness exists by design, whereas like it's a weakness of the design. It's a suboptimal design, whereas a vulnerability is not just suboptimal, it's also something that you can clearly move through with an exploit. So you can have weaknesses in configuration that aren't necessarily vulnerabilities because someone simply should have had the door locked, but they didn't lock the door, and that would be considered a weakness, but not a vulnerability because the door's fine, the lock's fine, someone just didn't lock it, right? And you can have the same thing in code when you're actually coding. You can have weaknesses, right, that aren't necessarily vulnerabilities, but we still need to track them because by tracking the weaknesses, we sometimes find that there are related vulnerabilities. So I just wanted to, because you were using that expert terminology, I wanted people who are watching to understand that these, in the world of pen testing, these things actually have specific meanings. Um, I know I derailed you there. Back into your story now that we've done some definitions here. Um, so you were talking about looking for these weaknesses in applications that might exist, right? And the types of damage that they might cause. But how do you turn that into practice, right? Because there's a million possible ways someone could get in, but in a penetration test, you have to have a goal of your tests, and then you have to run your test, and then have a way to report on it. So,
Yep.
how do we do that in a business application where maybe there's no known vulnerabilities, right? Or it's not easy to just like say, oh, it's got like SQL Server installed, therefore I have to make sure it's up at this patch level, right? It's not always that easy. So, what
Yep.
are we looking at there?
So when we talk about a vulnerability, there are multiple facets to it. It could be technology, it could be database related, it could be business logic. So it's not that one tool or one process will fit into and say, this is, I'm completed my vulnerability. Like generally people say, I use this tool for vulnerability or VAPT. In fact, the VAPT word is sometimes I feel it's the most abused word because people don't understand whether they are doing a vulnerability or whether they are doing a penetration test, because these are two different things. And most of the time I have seen people using open source softwares, they run the scan, they find vulnerabilities, and they say, I'm done with my VAPT. So that's not what is VAPT or penetration testing all about. Vulnerability assessment is just the first part of penetration testing. So in the first part, you try to find out what the vulnerabilities are, and then you start exploiting them, because you might have 1,000 vulnerabilities, but you don't have all the resources to close all the vulnerabilities. So you need to find the vulnerabilities which are exploitable, and that's where the pen testing comes in, where you think like an attacker, you start simulating like an attacker, and you start getting into the system. That's what has to be done so that we understand that how a vulnerability can be exploited or how it can be utilized in order to gain access. So, like you said rightly, there is a weakness, there is a vulnerability. Using these two, they exploit it, and then they try to get access to your application, to the data, and then whatever they want to do. They can get a remote code execution, access takeover, all of those things can happen. So the point is, it's not only at the network level, we need to also look at from an application level and also at a data level. Because a weakness might be there anywhere in this whole chronological order of sequence of events. So we have to be having, or we have to understand the weaknesses at every level. We cannot just say, okay, I did the pen testing for my application and it's all good. The application side might be better, but he might still be able to sneak in into some other means. So we need to be very careful when we are doing this pen testing. So pen testing has to be done at various levels. And when it comes to the application level, one thing that I generally hear from people is, oh, my application is on AWS, so I'm secure. We shouldn't be buying into that, or we shouldn't be thinking that I'm on AWS, so I'm secure. There are a lot of instances where applications which were on AWS, which were on different cloud, they still got hacked. And the reason for that is may not be the platform as such, but it could be the application, because your application had so many vulnerabilities that they were able to get into
I,
the application.
I want to double down on that point, Dinesh. There's this thinking in the business community sometimes that if you want your application to be more secure, to meet those security requirements, you you jump into like the gov cloud version of Amazon or GCP high, in Google or in Microsoft land, and you're in that high security data center. Somehow you're more safe. The reality is all of their data centers are very, very, very safe, actually. And in fact, there's this misconception because in both the Microsoft world and in the Amazon world, in their data centers, they're normal data centers, in the U.S. at least, and in various ways around the world they meet local requirements, right? But I know in the U.S. for U.S. requirements, even in the federal government, when you have highly sensitive federal information, a normal Amazon data center is fine. Same thing on the Microsoft side. A normal Microsoft data center is fine. What they're looking for is a higher level of assurance, right? You don't need to be running in the same data center as an intelligence agency, right? To be very, very, very secure. You can really be quite secure on the data center side, but there's lots of stuff that needs to happen over on the application side. So, there is this tendency to, I mean, people do this all the time. They spend 15, 20% more on their cloud bill. They jump into like the high security version of Amazon or Google. And like Amazon and Google are there, they're happy to take the money, right? Um, and it's you're really not more secure because when you look at it down at the applications and the systems that run in there, they're still connected to the internet. Amazon is not saying that your application's more secure. What they're saying is the physical building is more secure, right? And the reality is you're quite secure in any of those data centers, anywhere in the world, really. Um, those hyperscalers it doesn't matter what hyperscaler you choose, any of the hyperscalers, their data centers are quite safe. But you can get into a lot of trouble on the application and the configuration side. And none of the hyperscalers are saving you from that, right? So um, the penetration testing, can we just break down? There's this category of penetration testing, and you were talking about enumerating vulnerabilities, which is like actually not the first step, because the first step would be what are the things you have, like the asset discovery, right? And then as soon as you have the assets, you do the vulnerability discovery, and sometimes you actually attach those things together. So the same scanner that's doing the asset discovery is also doing the vulnerability discovery. But then I guess at that end of that, it goes back to a person, right? Someone's got to actually decide what's next. Is that right?
Yep, absolutely. So, so to your point, I get an analogy. You might be living in a high security zone. That doesn't mean that you have to leave your house open when you go out.
Yeah.
Because you said that, oh, I live in a high security zone, so my house is secured. Your house is secured, but you need to still make sure that you lock the doors properly, you have the security alarm, you have the right configurations. That's where we need to understand there is a responsibility of security. Securing your data is always on the application owner, not on the cloud owner where you are posting it. He might
Mm-hmm.
have had some guardrails that he might put together so that he might block somebody, block some IPs. He might do all of those things behind the scenes. But if somebody sneaks in into your application, is he able to get in, take access, or then conduct a breach? That's what you need to be also be aware of. And we have seen a lot of these things. Your application might be vulnerable where I can do a click jacking because you never tested for it. You just
Mm-hmm.
put in the application, the functionality was working. I just moved it to my production environment in the cloud, and there was somebody who came in, he did a click jacking exercise, and boom, your application is gone. He executed some code, and you're done.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and there's unfortunately, there are hundreds and hundreds of different tactics that an attacker can use to get that foothold, right? So you talked about well, yeah, of course, there's lots of theoretical ways to break into an organization, right? But some of them are easier than others. Some of them are more practical than others. And the focus of the penetration test you were saying is to prove out in this business context, in this infrastructure configuration, what actually is easy, possible, practical from an attacker's perspective, right? Um, so you were talking about clickjacking, but are there broad categories of areas that you dismiss or you include early on in the process, or is this you try everything and see what sticks? What is the normal mode of operation here?
So then, when it comes to security, it's better that you execute and implement as much as possible, because you might think I've done 99 things and there's one thing that I've missed, and I think it's not important. You can never write it out, because somebody might sneak in from that 1% itself. Either you are secured or you are not secured. You cannot say, okay, I'm 99% secured, but 1% I'm not secure. You cannot say that. So, our goal is that we test as much as possible, because, as you hear, new technologies, new ways of breaching, and always the hackers are ahead of the guys who are trying to stop them. So they have some new ideas. So it's always better to test as much as possible and don't leave anything to chance. Because if you have left something to chance, maybe you may not even get a chance to correct it afterwards.
So you're, I mean, are you, do you walk the MITRE the MITRE inventory? Do you have just a suite of best practice tools that you're always sort of like clawing around to see what attackers are using in the real world? How do you decide? I mean, there's you can't test unlimited things, right? Even if you're testing many, many, many things, there's still a limit. So how do you keep up to date on this? That must be a big part of what your team does is staying sharp.
Yep, absolutely. So this is exactly where we as an organization come in, where we don't want to stick to any one tool, because we have tested and we have worked on multiple tools. Some tools are good at certain areas, the other tools are good at other areas, because there is so much of technology differentiation from product to product, the way it is implemented, the way it is used by the end user, the way it is deployed. So there are a lot of ifs and buts, and one tool doesn't fit all. So if you say,
Mhm.
okay, I have a tool XYZ and I've tested, I've completed my VAPT, sorry, that could be equivalent to snake oil, because one tool cannot test all.
I'm so I totally get what you're saying. And I'm somewhat familiar with some of these tools. But it's been a while since I was hands on with that type of testing. Um, but there's always new things, and the old tools. It's not like you're just gonna like get the latest version of whatever and it's gonna work on that new attack. I know that as an example, one of the big emerging threats right now, which and I say emerging because it's not here yet, but as a security person, I can clearly see the edge of it. I think that most engineers and people watching this stream are probably familiar with the risks that might be present in AI. And we're aware that there's penetration testers out there that are either working for the frontier model developers, or they're independent and they're trying to do jailbreaks on AI, and they're trying to get AI to do things it's not supposed to do. Um, but most of that's theoretical. Most of that is, hey guys, world, you need to be worried about these theoretical risks. But pretty soon, we're actually going to need individual versions of this for every single company. Companies are actually going to need AI pen testing for each company. This is not something that only um, Google and Microsoft and OpenAI, Anthropic need to worry about, because there's this new generation of integrations between the AI models and all of our business applications that's happening over this new protocol called the Model Context Protocol. And businesses are soon going to be required to set up these, what are called the acronym MCP channels between those AI models and all their business applications, which just means there's going to be a brand new avenue for attackers to try to worm their way into applications through legitimate pathways. And I'm not aware of a tool that exists yet for testing that, because I know the MCP servers themselves are brand new this year. But I can only imagine this time next year there's going to be tool automation for this, because uh, companies are going to really start bringing this out of the laboratory, and they're going to be operating these interfaces between their business applications and AI. And let me tell you, as soon as those interfaces are live, people are going to be people are going to be attacking through them. And of course, that means that the pen testers need to be following that. So I imagine over the last 20 years, you've seen a series of things like that you've had to jump on. What's I think that emerging threat I'm talking about, it's not quite here yet, but what is here that's pretty new that your teams had to sort of change their playbook around?
So one of the big things is data poisoning. So
Mm-hmm.
especially in the AI models, if somebody pushes in wrong data, then your whole model goes for a toss, and it might give wrong results. And these wrong results might, could be fatal. Let's say, for example, an electric car, driverless car, which has a data model which says this is a cat, and somebody poisons the data, and instead of a cat, for a human being, it says it's not a human being, it's a cat, and the vehicle keeps going. Just imagine what could happen. There could be so many deaths. Now, when you have that sort of a issue, whom do you go after? Do you go after the model? Do you go after the data? Do you go after the vehicle manufacturer? Or whom will you go behind? That's one of the big challenges that we are facing. That's on the AI side that I talked about. But the other thing that I saw, or what we are seeing, is companies are very scared from the ransomware attacks, because the ransomware has become a new business model. In fact, that's one of the best business model nowadays. It's no more called ransomware; it's called ransom extortion. So it's an extortion business. Instead of showing a gun and taking money from you, I lock your systems and I don't allow you to do business to make money. And then I say, okay, I need this money from you so that I can give you the code for you to start running your business. So this is a very big business, and people are scared. If something like that happens to their business organization, then what happens? So that's one of the big challenges that organizations are nowadays facing it. And obviously, even a lot on the reputational damage. People don't want to be on the wrong side of the news. So that's also where we see a lot of change happening, or corporates want to have their systems secured as such. And the big part is they don't know what is insecured.
Yeah, like many companies, I have a CRM. And I
Uh-huh.
know that there are forms that we have that are directly exposed to the internet, and we've got pretty good protections on inputs. Um, and so I'm aware of that class of problems, and we have our controls in place. But I can see it on a daily basis. We're getting spray attacks, and people are looking for these potential opportunities to um, uh, poison or inject, into that environment. And sometimes they can take advantage of this with execution payloads, right? But they can also just destroy your database. Someone could spray so much bad data in there that it's totally useless, even if there's not an exploit payload in there, right? It's easy to mess up someone's database if it's connected to the outside world, as most databases are these days. So I know that the challenge isn't just someone's going to lock you out, or someone's going to steal your data, or someone's going to leak your data, or someone's going to destroy your data. Like by deleting it, it's also someone, like you said, someone could taint it, right? Someone could poison it. Sometimes just out of spite, right? Or you didn't pay the ransom, right? Um,
Yep.
so when you're doing your testing, I imagine that type of testing change every year because the actual way we build software changes from year to year. We got major framework changes, and that must be a constantly moving surface.
In fact, let me also bring up another point here. The other day we were testing a fintech product, and you wouldn't believe 75% of the code of that software was available on GitHub. It was
Which makes your job easier, right?
one, it makes my job easier, but also it makes the hacker's job easier because if he takes code from certain applications which from GitHub and he knows how to hack them, he can hack them at scale
Yeah.
because most of the applications might have that functionality built in, and people might just be copy pasting that particular functionality from GitHub.
Well, and this isn't a theoretical threat. I think that if you're a programmer, you're probably aware that there's tools in GitHub that will either can, if you turn it on, or automatically already do look for types of problems in your code and then let you know, hey, you've got this type of problem in your code. But attackers are running those types of tools across all of GitHub at all times, and they are not telling you when they find these issues, they are inventorying them. And then once they inventory them, they assign people to research them and see how they can exploit them. And that's a real risk these days. And it's a big difference from few years ago, when that was not happening yet. It was a theoretical risk a few years ago, even 3, 4 years ago. This was a theoretical risk. Um, um, and the biggest problem we had to worry about on GitHub is someone accidentally uploaded a password or secret key or something like that. But the problem is so much bigger these days, where people are looking for all sorts of classes of problems because they have excellent mechanization, sometimes using AI, to look for classes of problems across the whole world of source code, right? So the first thing I remember seeing was people looking for keys to S3 buckets, right?
Yep.
Um, but there are thousands of, if not more, types of problems that could be in your source code. Some of them not so obvious if you're not a threat modeler, and but there are people out there that know how to threat model and not for a living, but they wear a black hat and they're in the extortion business, right? And they don't even necessarily extort the victims. They find the hole and then they sell it off to someone whose job is just to the extortion guy, and the extortion guy may know nothing about how to break into that hole. Someone else did that for him, right? So
In,
that's it's
in
big
fact, that
business.
In fact, that's what we are seeing now. Even the whole business of hacking is getting specialized in their verticals. So there are
Yep.
guys who will only find the vulnerabilities and give it to the next guy. He only
Yep.
finds the exploits, and he tells you if you do these 10 things, you can hack into any place. Then he goes and starts hacking, and then there is a different guy who takes the money. So th- it's like a supply chain has got created in the hacking business as such.
Yeah.
One person is not doing everything,
Yep.
and
Yeah. And
because of that, the chances to get caught are also pretty less now.
yeah. Well, and there's a lot of many parts of that supply chain are, let's call them dark. And what I mean by dark is they're below the waterline. You can't see them, right? And neither can police, right?
Correct.
So there's a very small part of that supply chain which is exposed, and theoretically something that, as a civilian or as a law enforcement organization, or a regulator, there's very few parts of that supply chain that they actually have any control over at all, because most of the entire business is dark and, can't. I would say it's safe. They are safe from law enforcement. They are safe from regulators. They're totally, particularly with cryptocurrencies and such, totally untraceable, untrackable, unstoppable, unless we simply protect our surfaces. Right? We protect our surfaces. We make our applications more resilient and robust. Um, so you're using different tools. You find an inventory of potential problems. Uh, are how frequently do you find like I gotcha, we got in, and how frequently is a little bit more involved where you have to do one thing, you accomplish one goal, which gets you to another goal, which gets you to another goal, and you're really establishing what we call as an attack chain, right? To get into to create a theoretical loss. Like how much of the time do you have to like really stack those things up the way the real attackers do?
So, okay, now when it comes to pen testing, most of the time it so happens the customer gives us a deadline, says, I want to complete this in 2 weeks, I want to complete this in 3 weeks. So, generally, when we have that sort of a timeline where somebody wants only for a maybe it's for a certification or only for a scope of test, we test that and we provide it to them. But there are certain engagements where we do continuous testing, so we are obviously testing them, and when we do that, we are able to get the chain of attack, what you said. Because sometimes I completely agree that it's always the resources versus what you can do. But when somebody gives you that free hand and says, hey, this is my critical applications, these are my 10 critical applications, it doesn't matter whether you give me one bug or 10 bugs. I'm not going to measure you on that, but keep doing the tests so that you get the chain of attack. And in those sort of scenarios, when we start poking into different directions using different tools, so different tools give us different results, and when we start using those results and start going forward, we do find exploits, we do find vulnerabilities, we do find weaknesses, and that's where our customers come back and said, hey, you guys have exactly delivered what we were looking for.
Right. So
Because
that's I want to point out here because what you're talking about is really involved. Okay. And it may sound like, well, what attacker's going to like spend all year trying to get into a place? Like, I'm not that important of a target, but the reality is actually that's the way it works. Is as we just discussed, there's different specialties in networks of organized crime, and sometimes they're loosely affiliated networks. Sometimes they're actually tightly controlled criminal corporate organizations with departments, and uh, they are constantly constantly doing their business, right? And they are and there's also some misconception out there because of this acronym that I've heard tossed around in the world: advanced persistent threat, which everyone's afraid of. They're the boogeymen that break into things. If you haven't heard of that term, that's a term we use against specific attack organizations that attack. And we don't typically put names on them. It'll be like APT 28 or something like that because attribution is difficult. While we might be able to create a signature for that attacker, we don't necessarily politically can't name who they are because we can't prove it in court, right? Now, from a security defender's point of view, it doesn't matter. We're just looking at methods, and we want to stop those methods. We don't want to get hurt by the bad guys. But I want to talk about that terminology because people there's a lot of misconception out there that people think that um, advanced persistent threat is something that only attacks you if you're a humongous corporation or a government, right? These are actually two separate things. When we talk about advanced, we're talking about highly sophisticated, right? But then there's persistent, which just means they're doing it all the time. But there's actually attackers out there at lower levels of sophistication. They might not be very sophisticated, but they're persistent and they're there all the time. And what you're talking about in being persistent in your testing, that's the way that attackers are in the real world. Yes, if they can snap their fingers and break into your company and do whatever they're going to do, they will do it. But the vast majority of the time, when they create an impact, when you finally get that extortion request, actually, that's at the end of a 3 month, 4 month, 6 month, 9 month campaign. And they were very persistent in building the attack chain, getting a foothold, building the next attack chain, scoping out and surveilling inside, extracting information, and then finally looking for that extortion. And so what you're talking about doing there, that you're saying, well, some customers are really give you a free reign to do really deep investigations. Actually, there's attackers out there doing that for free all the time to basically the whole planet. They're doing it for free. You are being tested like this all the time if you're on the internet. Um, Except the attackers in the real world, um, they're not going to give you the results of the report unless they already got you. So it sounds like that's actually the type of test that everyone should be asking you for is, hey, we'd like to monitor this over time. We'd like you to try to, over a period of time, see how far you can get. This is like the budget envelope, but this is not a one-time thing. We're expecting you to break in 2 weeks. Because let me tell you, the attackers, they don't confine themselves to 2-week tests. That's for sure.
So
You were just about to say something else, but I wanted to stop there just to say that thing you were doing is actually what happens in the real world.
in fact, you brought in a very good point, especially with regard to the APT. So when you try to drill down into what APT is all about, it comes into the two things are the skill and focus. So earlier, the skill was less, the focus was low. But now the skills the skills used by the hacker are going up, and they are more focused. When I say more focused, they know, okay, I want to go behind this guy, and or maybe I want to go behind these sort of guys, and they are pretty focused. And it's not that they will do something in 1 day or 2 days. There is a complete process which they go through when they want to attack any place. So they would do the reconnaissance, where they would start getting information. They would get information about the organization, what it is, how big, small, what can I do, what can I not do. So there is this whole reconnaissance that they would be doing. And this cannot be done in 1 day and say, okay, boom, okay, I'm going to go behind this guy. No, that doesn't work that way. Then once the reconnaissance is done, they would go for something which is known as weaponization. So they will say, okay, what is the they will start putting the weapons together. That's again, it takes time. It's not something that happens overnight. So to your point, when we talk about APT, it talks about high skill, and there is a high focus. Only if you have a skill better than the hackers, and if you are more focused than the hacker, that's when you will be able to save yourself. Otherwise, he might dominate you.
So I'm just throwing the Lockheed cyber kill chain up there. Let me see if I can shrink that a little bit to how's that? So you were talking about reconnaissance, weaponization, right? Delivery. I want to point out here, right, that there is sort of a normalized mode of attack that you use the word focus, right? I like using business terms because they're businesses now. They have business processes, they have procedures, they have policies, they have playbooks and standards, right? They're executing a business operation, and this is the methodology they use because it's the most effective, right? And they break down all these pieces and they work through this. Um, work through this methodology because it works. Because it works and it's hard to stop, right? So as as a tester, right, you're not getting all the way through the kill chain, right? You're getting far enough through the kill chain to really prove to the customer that they should have stopped this before now, because at this point in the attack, it's too late, right? So if and this is a big misconception in the security world. I hear all the time, and I don't mean to bash vendors because that's not what this is. But I hear all the time things like, "Oh, we have Arctic Wolf, or we have CrowdStrike, or we have like whatever. We feel so secure. We've got like the best thing in the world that stops attacks." So I want you to I want to point out that those products, those detection products, those operate down between step 5 and 6. Okay. Step 5 and 6, you don't even bother documenting that part, I would imagine, because by the time you've gotten to step 4, you've already proven the attack, right? That's the part that takes a long time. The biggest problem from the perspective of those detection tools is reconnaissance through exploitation, right? That takes days, weeks, months, right? Installation through actions on objectives, that can happen on a holiday weekend, right? And if you have a detection tool, let me tell you, if it doesn't detect the thing until like the attacker is already sucking terabytes out the door, right? That tool really didn't do much for you, right? It's like great, it raised a flag that data's flowing out the door right now, right? And I'm going to tell you this installation step that we and the command and control steps that we sometimes we count on the fact that our EDR tools or MDR tools are going to find those things, the installation and command and control channels. It's going to detect those things and tell you that, hey, we got malware on the thing, right? But increasingly, attackers are living off the land, which means they're installing nothing. They're installing nothing, and they're really hard to detect. So these simulations are really important in understanding, okay, how can we actually protect ourselves instead of waiting until the impact's already happened?
Yep. In fact, you brought in a very good point. Most of the time, people say that or they think that I have a good detection system. But where penetration comes is this is a prevention system. People don't think about penetration testing as a prevention system. They want to spend money more on detection. But detection is happening after something has already happened. Why don't you try to prevent something from happening? That's
Mm-hmm.
what is more important. In fact, on in the security side, we should start moving left. That's what I always say. Start moving left so that you start moving more on the prevention rather than more on detection and correction. Because there is a cost of prevention, there is a cost of detection, and there is a cost of correction. If the cost of prevention is, let's say, $1, the cost of detection will be $5, the cost of correction will be $50.
It's
So the
it's
more
interesting. Those I just have to stop you because those numbers are really interesting. I use a very similar explanation when I talk about this. It's the same math. It's the same math because that's the real math is that um, about half of if you have created a really beautiful, well-rounded security architecture, right? It's quite responsive and stopping most of the potential threats that are out there, right? Um, about 50% of your dollars go into protection, and they eliminate 80% of risk, right? It takes another 50% of your dollars to then stop that last 20%. And that's through detection. That's through reactive means. So it's more expensive to be reactive. But the other way of looking at that is if you only spend the $50 on the reactive, you're only protecting yourself 20%. Which so if you look at it in terms of dollars spent, um, and risk reduced, it's really hard to justify putting much money into detection until you've already done all you can in protection because your dollars go 5 times further. So I make the same explanation whenever I talk to an end client, and those are real world numbers, right? They're not. This isn't hyperbolic language. So
But one thing
then
what
there's the
happens
impact, the
is,
recovery, right? You were 50 times more, right?
in
Yeah.
fact, but the problem is it's the mindset. When somebody is breached, they would like to spend whatever they have in order to get themselves secured. So the problem is when you are in a mode where you are hacked or you are breached and you know that somebody has got into your system, you would want to spend 100 times more than what you could have spent preventing it just to get to the normal state. And to get to that normal state, it doesn't just take money. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of mental strain. It takes a lot of people's efforts, because you don't know what all has got breached and how to bring it back. You need to maybe format the system. Sometimes even after formatting the systems, it doesn't work. So there is a lot of mental pain, agony that all the stakeholders have to go through. It's just not, okay, I pay you the money and I get it. No, everybody has to go through the mental agony. Why do you want to do that? That's what they say. Stitch in time, save nine. So it's better that you prevent, so that you need not spend money on curing it.
Well, I want to take a moment here before we run out of time, Dinesh, to just talk about your actual organization. Help us understand. Um, Describe your organization, how you are helping people, what's the impact to organizations, and when should they call you, and what's the call to action? How should they reach out?
The first thing is, our goal is to reduce cost of finding the vulnerabilities. The reason being, the why I say that is, there is so much of this landscape is changing so fast. One tool cannot test all. That's the first point. Second point, for you to cover, the organization has to spend a lot of money on managing these tools, understanding these tools, and always keeping abreast with these tools, which is very difficult. So we do that for the organizations. That's exactly our secret sauce is, we keep evaluating these tools, and then we find out, for this particular technology, for this product, for this sort of a business process, which is the best fit product, so that we can bring in that product. That's one. The second most important part is, over a period of time, we have created knowledge base, we have created our own scenarios, we have created our own techniques, we have created our own tactics, we have created our own procedures, that where we have a lot of knowledge base that we use in addition to the tools also. So just don't think that throwing a tool at a security problem, all your problems will vanish. No, let me be very clear on that. Tools can only go to a certain extent, but after that, it's the human and a multitude of tools, a plethora of tools that have to come in place, and that's where we come in. So we bring down the cost, we bring in more value by finding more valuable vulnerabilities for you, the exploits for you, and we help in continuous threat monitoring for your applications. These are the areas how we help our organizations, our customers, and we follow all the frameworks that are currently available in the market.
Yeah, and I want to just add one more. I want to chip in here one more time because you're describing all this great work, but I also want to point out in most scenarios, even if you have the skill set, um, if you have a contractual requirement to do penetration testing or there's a regulatory reason to perform penetration testing, typically it's not admissible to do that internally. It is expected that you bring in an outside organization for separation of duties and such. So it's really important to have that outside oversight, and the fact that you guys can certify these tests is really what makes that that documentation valuable.
Yep.
Um, well, head on over to Dinesh's website, digitowork.com, if you're looking to learn more. Uh, Looks like coming up just next week, we are going to be talking to Joe Rojas and Jeff. And this is a first, by the way, that we've had Jeff on the show from Start, Grow, Manage to talk about building MSPs, growing MSPs. We're the title on the tin is unlocking hidden revenue in client accounts, but what we're really talking about is the age old adage. The existing client sale is the best client sale. So we'll be talking about that next week. Until then, Dinesh, thank you so much for being here with me today. I hope that you continue to grow and evolve your offering for something we really need in this world. So thanks for joining.
Yep. Thank you, Matt. It was really fun talking to you. Really great speaking to you. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
But bye bye. Take care.